Hey YouTube, and welcome back to my channel. In today's video, we are going to be asking the million-dollar question in personal finance, and it is, does it make sense to buy a house, apartment, property? It always tends to get oversimplified with people either saying yes, it makes sense, or no, it doesn't make sense. And it usually fails to go over the different factors that you have to analyze and then apply to your personal circumstance to come to a conclusion. What you will see in my analysis is that it is very specific to me. It's specific to my current circumstance, my age, my life objectives, the fact that I'm a woman that has this intention in terms of where her family is going, where her career is going, and also the market that I'm in and the market circumstances that I'm in, what the interest rates are, what the property prices already are. Those are the kinds of questions you need to ask and adapt them to your own personal circumstance and objectives. Now, the first factor that I would analyze before making this decision is a good look at your family finances and your generational wealth. Now, I live in Italy, for you guys that don't know, but I'm American. I moved here when I was 18, so there's still a lot of stuff about the American system that I don't know in the concrete sense because I didn't experience it. But from my understanding, in the United States, when you buy a house, whether it be your first house, your fifth house, whatever, you have to pay property taxes on that house. And it is from my understanding that this property tax, it gets paid every single year as long as you own the house for 100 years. You'll always have to pay that property tax. In Italy, it works out so that the current law, because laws change here a lot, if the house is your first house, your primary home, you don't have to pay a property tax on that. But if it is your second home, your third home, more than your first home, then you have to start paying taxes on that. If you're in a situation where you know that the way the assets are set up in your family with respect to the number of heirs there are, that you are going to inherit a property or a home or an apartment, an immobile in Italian, you would want to probably double check on if it makes sense for you to inherit that house. More than anything, if it makes sense for you to buy another house, you're going to want to analyze that situation because there are already people just normally that can't necessarily afford their lifestyle. They're struggling to get by. Now imagine, God forbid, somebody in your family passes away and you inherit a property and now you have to pay property taxes on top of it. That's going to be an issue. It's going to be even worse of an issue if the house is not in a prime location. And so you can't rent it easily, you can't resell it, and then on top of not being able to rent or sell it and then get income from it, you also have to pay taxes on top of it. You want to take a look at your family situation. If your family has houses in the family that could get passed down to you, it probably wouldn't make sense tax-wise to buy a house immediately. Meanwhile, if your family has nothing, that kind of changes things because first of all, there's the tax incentives for first-time home buyers. Like I already said, if you're in Italy and you don't have any generational wealth, you're not getting any houses passed down to you, then it makes sense probably to buy something of your own. You're going to want to. Also with terms to the sentimental aspect, because there isn't just the financial aspect, there's a sentimental one as well. It'll feel really nice to own something that is yours. One could say that when analyzing the generational wealth of a person and the assets that are already in the family, somebody that doesn't have any generational wealth or any assets that are going to get passed down to them, it's going to make more sense for them in terms of taxes to probably buy a house with respect to somebody that already has generational wealth. Then we want to move on to the financial aspect of the markets and if you live in a place where it makes sense to buy a house or property, because it doesn't make sense everywhere. Actually, in Italy, where I am, it probably only makes sense in a few major cities. Just about everywhere else in Italy, property prices have significantly gone down because of demographic factors. And the demographic factor is essentially that more people are leaving these towns that are coming to these towns, so the demand for houses is a lot less than the amount of houses there are on the market. And so supply and demand, the price of the houses go down in those areas, and it wouldn't make sense to buy a house in a place where prices are going down. In theory, a house is supposed to be an investment. Now, like I said, it's not always going to be. It might just end up being a sentimental purchase. I feel like most time family homes are sentimental purchases. And just because you're not going to make a positive economic return on that purchase doesn't necessarily mean that you're not going to do it. I mean, if you want to have space for your kids to run around in the house, if you want to have space to be comfortable in your home, if you want to just have a big house that's yours, then you might not look at all the economic factors and you might be able to ignore some. But if you are looking to buy a house as an economic investment and you want to get a return on it, you need to look at the market and analyze whether that's a market where more people are coming and therefore more demand with respect to supply, and so property prices are going up. Some ways to figure out if you're in a good property market, there are actually two main ways to look at it. One way is in the buying selling market and the other way is in the rental market, because usually to make a profit off of a home, what you're going to do is either you're going to buy it at a price, sell it at a higher price, or you're going to buy it at a price and rent it out until you recuperate all of the money you spent to buy the house and make a profit. Things to look at: are there businesses in the city, in the area? Are businesses moving to the city, into the area? Are new businesses coming? Because the more businesses there are, the more people will be attracted to the city to find work. And the more people that are attracted to the city to find work, the higher the demand for houses. Another thing to look up is if there are universities or colleges in that area. If there are, then you're probably going to have a revolving door of students coming to the market. You're going to have a revolving door of students in the city, and therefore a higher demand for places to stay. Is the place a tourist destination? If there is a healthy tourist season and there isn't a pandemic, then you'll probably always have people there looking to rent out the house, and there's a very healthy renters market there. If the answer to all of these questions are no, if businesses are closing in that area, if there aren't any higher institutions, if people aren't really coming to that area for any reason at all, so it's one of those areas in bumfuck nowhere, or just one of those areas that are just experiencing the opposite of gentrification, I guess, then it's not going to make sense, economically speaking, to buy a property there. Now, if I want to use myself as a real life example, I'm in the middle of the home buying process here in Milan, and so a lot of people were asking me, since I talk about personal finance and stuff, like, oh Tia, but does it make sense to buy a house? Isn't a house just going to be a cost? And yada yada. And so if looking back on my personal circumstance and where I am and what the factors are around me, I don't really have any generational wealth. I don't have any assets that are going to be immediately passed down to me. So it was really important for me to acquire some things with my name on them that will be mine. I plan to have them generate income for me and that I can pass down to my kids so they don't have this same dilemma that I'm having. Another thing is that I live in the city of Milan in 2020. Now, all of these pieces of the sentence are important. I say in 2020 because interest rates right now are the lowest they've ever been. And the way that property prices are, they are high and they are rising, but they're still just at the point where you might be able to get something. Next year, 2 years from now, 3 years from now, 5 years from now, I don't know. But right now, it's like at the precipice point. And so since I had the money in my bank account and since I could afford it, since the interest rates were going to make my monthly mortgage, condo fees, insurance, and renovation loan, all 4 pieces of financing that I'm getting done, thanks to interest rates, all of those things together would still be less of a monthly expense than my rent is right now. But living in a house where I'm paying the mortgage in 2020 in Milan because of interest rates, the cost is much less for me with respect to paying rent. So that's another reason why it made sense. Since Milan has a lot of universities, a lot of companies, it has always been the city in Italy where people have come to kind of like find their fortune. And it was becoming, and it is becoming, a European center where people from outside of Italy, people from other parts of Europe are coming to experience Italian life, work at companies that are based in Italy, study at Italian universities. It's a city that's very much on the up and up. It's not completely inaccessible yet, like places like New York or London. It's at that right sweet point. And given my personal circumstances of not having generational wealth, having some savings, and being in the right city, it made sense to me to make the economic investment in buying an apartment in the city. Right now, my plan, because you have to think in the short term and the long term, in the short term, and I mean in the next 1 to 3 years, it will be the apartment where me and my boyfriend live, because as I said, expense-wise, like that is a significant decrease in expenses. So for the first year, it's not an investment that's making me any money. It'll just be a cost cut. Then after, if I'm thinking about like the next 5 to 6 years, that's around the time where we hope that we'll be able to afford to have children. And at that point, I would hope that we would have saved enough from, our decreased expenses to buy or rent out a bigger house, a bigger family home, and then I could rent out my apartment and use that money as like a supplement to the fact that I think that I want to like not be a stay-at-home mom, but I don't want to have to be forced to go back to work when my kids are still super young. I think that I want to stay and have as much time with them as I can and be as involved as I can in the early years. And so I think having a rental property to supplement my income from not working as much will be very useful. Then in the years after that, I mean, it all depends. There are so many options because you can choose to do short-term rentals, you can choose to do long-term rentals. If the kids decide that they want to go to college in Milan, at least I won't have to pay rent for them to go to college in Milan, assuming we don't have the family home in Milan. There's so many things to consider, but just to bring you guys into my mindset when I'm looking at buying the house as an investment. If I weren't in Milan, I probably wouldn't be thinking this way. Maybe if I was in Rome, maybe Turin, but me being in Milan right now with interest rates what they are was a big driving force into, yes, it made perfect sense to buy a home as an investment. But don't think that because you see people buying houses right now, that you have to, but at the same time, don't discount it as a good investment just because I know there's all of these articles about being a digital nomad for the rest of your life and how houses are obsolete and millennials can't buy houses and shouldn't think of buying houses, because that's not necessarily true. You might not be able to afford a house in your market at the market rate, but for example, what I did in Milan is I won my house through an auction because I couldn't afford the normal market. If you analyze these factors of generational wealth and taxes, if you analyze the factor of like, am I living in a good market where it would be easy to rent or sell the house in order to make a profit? If those things check out, then yes, buying a house could be a good economic investment. And even if it's not a good economic investment, it could just be a sentimental purchase, and you're free to do that with your money. But I think that is the true answer to, does it make sense for me to buy a home or not? I hope that this video was informational and it wasn't too boring. I hope that it wasn't too technical, and I hope that I answered the question. Let me know what you guys think in the comment section down below. I would love to hear your opinions and experiences. Do you agree with me? Do you disagree with me? Don't forget to like and subscribe if you haven't already. And as always, you guys, I will see you in my next one. Mwah.